So when Rick and Morty Season 2 was first starting, episodes 1 and 2 had been leaked like months beforehand. I'd watched them like 3 times a piece. I thought they were super great. And the night that episode 1 actually debuted on Adult Swim, the staff had like this big party, which I guess is probably a pretty normal thing to do on the debut of your video. But what was unique about this one was that they live streamed it. They did a whole thing where they had the two creators, Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, up on like a stage, drunk as shit, with this interviewer guy, and they were like bringing up different people who worked on the show and talking to them for a little bit. I mean, everyone, it's clear that this is primarily just a party that was happening anyways, and they just decided to like impromptu do this live stream thing, you know. They just like kind of drag people up for a couple minutes, talk to them, and they'd go back to the party. With the exception of Dan and Justin, who were just up there like fucking wasted talking about stuff. And this was one of the most eye-opening things I've ever watched as a fan. It was like deeply fascinating because of the things they were saying about their staff members. You see, they'd completed making the season, you know, before it ever went to air, because that's how American cartoons are made, very different from anime, which is down to the wire with each episode. But you know, they were talking about how a lot of their like best guys had been poached by Disney, and there's nothing they could really do to stop them. I mean, they brought up like their guy who was like one of the main showrunners or whatever for the season, or assistant directors or something like that, and they were both like, yeah, this guy's great, you know, he's been bought up by Disney because Rick and Morty is such a good show that everybody on it is like, you know, is being eyeballed by other people in the industry. But Rick and Morty itself is a relatively low budget show on Adult Swim. You know, it's like, they can't pay these people what they could be getting paid on you know, higher level productions. And like, they were like, yeah, he's got a family, and of course he's gonna take the job at Disney. You know, they're gonna pay him twice what we are. And you know, Dan and Justin are doing this show because they want the creative freedom of being able to work on whatever, you know, that they get afforded by Adult Swim, which means working for less money. And like, so, you know, of course this guy is gonna go to Disney. But they were like, yeah, if season 3 sucks, it's because we lost him. And I was just like, whoa. And they were explaining that the reason that season 2 of Rick and Morty took so long to come out, because it was like a year and a half between when, you know, like season 1 had come out, and then there was a huge gap. They had announced season 2 like way ahead of time, and it took forever. And it's taken forever now for season 3. I mean, we're a year and a half from season 2, and there's still no season 3 yet, even though it was announced after like episode 1 of season 2. They'd already been greenlit for the next season. Which was kind of a shame, because by the time episode 1 of season 2 came out, they'd already had a bunch of their guys bought up, because there was no guarantee that they were getting a season 3 of Rick and Morty. And then by the time they had that guarantee, some of their best staff were already gone. You know, this is the inner workings of the industry. But they said the reason it took so long to get season 2 is that Justin Roiland is just so talented and so integral to the show that like they can't duplicate him. Like, they can't find someone who's, like, you know, able to bring as much as he is to the show. So it's just that it takes so long to because, you know, he voice acts half the fucking characters. He plays the 2 main characters. He plays a bunch of the other minor characters. He writes most of the show. He directs most of the show. He's, you know, deeply involved at every stage of production. He does the character designs, I believe. He does... like, he fucking basically does everything on the show. And there's just nobody who can fill in the gaps in his workload. And that's why it takes so long for Rick and Morty season 2. And that, like, blew my mind. And they were saying, like, you know, the guy who was getting bought up was, like, the closest thing they had to someone who could fill in the gaps in Justin Roiland. And now he's gone, and they're fucked. This is basically the way they were putting it. And I was like, whoa. And now I totally relate to that, because, and I know this is gonna sound conceited, like I'm saying I'm some kind of massive talent or something, but like there's a lot of times where I'm like, man, my life would be so much easier if there was just another me to cover some of this ground. Because a lot of what I make, it's not about me making it, it's about me wanting it to exist. A lot of the anime videos I do, I would be fine if someone else made them. If someone else, you know, made a video where they watched every Akiyuki Shinbo show and talked about every technique he used, I would never have had to do that video. I would just be like, oh, you did it, cool. And, you know, I've said this about a number of YouTube videos where I've said, like, now that that guy did it, I don't have to. You know, people will ask my opinions on shows sometimes, and I'll be like, this dude already did it. So, like, recently, someone said, are you ever going to do a video on Berserk? And I'm like, Super Eye Patch Wolf's video on Berserk said everything I would have said about Berserk. I mean, maybe I could do a video about, like, just the scene where Guts kills 100 guys and just flaunt over how much I like that scene. But even that, I couldn't fill a whole video, probably. So, yeah, it's like it's already out there. But the problem is that there's so many things that I want to exist, and that, like, I can't rely on anyone else to make because nobody else has the time. Like, who else has time to watch every Shinbo show and write about it, you know? Who else? Because no one else is making money doing this like the way I am. You know, I feel like I'm the only person doing, like, super in-depth anime analysis and getting paid to do it. Most of the people doing YouTube videos are not putting out videos frequently enough to make any money. Like, you know, Best Guy Ever, he has a Patreon, and it could become a career one day, but he puts out videos so infrequently that he doesn't get paid enough for his videos, you know? And he's not even doing, like, really research-driven stuff. It's more just, like, here's why this thing is amazing. But, like, yeah, nobody else. I mean, maybe Yu Cow. I don't know how much money he makes or anything. But, like, yeah, like, there's not a lot of people who would have the time and resources to do what I do. And there's just so many ideas I have. And, like, it can be painful sometimes to, like, realize the sheer enormity of how much stuff falls on me because there's no one else to do it. And that really is what I connect to with the whole Justin Roiland thing. Yeah. There's no way to say it without sounding conceited, but again, it's not about the quality of what I'm doing. It's just about wanting those, like, I'm not saying that the world needs a Shinbo video, but, like, it's something I want to exist, and there's too many things I want to do. That's really the point that I'm getting at. So Casey Neistat just happened to end his vlog mere days after I had released the previous Decompression chamber, in which I talked about how his videos had kind of gotten stale and how he was probably going to end the vlog soon. And then sure enough, it happened. I mean, I got a bunch of messages about it. People like, it's your fault. What did you do? But honestly, it was pretty obvious it was going to happen. He joked about it. I mean, he'd said he was going to do it a number of times. The vlog was not going to live forever. He had a video jokingly, like, clickbaiting, saying that, like, called The End of the Vlog, where he was really, like, talking about the end of that vlog, that was something special, or something like that. It was, or maybe it was the end of the vlog for a day or some shit. But, I mean, he'd been taking more breaks from it. He'd been saying that he was trying to get more challenges, and honestly, what said to me that the vlog was going to end soon was this whole thing where he was going to make this, he was going to edit this video he shot in Vietnam with his son, and he kept saying, like, you know, I might put the vlog on hold for a couple of days or something, or, like, I might do this and that, I have to edit this video. And then, like, for the next few vlogs, he kept saying, like, you know, well, I'm still working on the video, you know, it's just taking a little longer. And I was like, to me, this is a sign that the vlogs are in the way, you know, that he couldn't finish this video because what little time he has to work on video is going towards the vlog. So I had a feeling it was ending soon, and that's why I kind of talked about it that way. And because Neistat works the same way I do. He's all about challenging himself and finding new ways to do things. For me, it's more a matter of getting bored and having too many ideas and wanting to do something different all the time, as well as being afraid of getting stale. Whereas for him, it's more about the personal growth of like doing something that's harder than what you're currently doing. Anyways, all of that aside, just wanted to address that since it was funny. Back when I started this podcast, a few people had said that they accidentally misread the title as Digibro's Depression Chamber. Well, that's what today's episode's gonna be. I'm not depressed right now, but I'm going to go ahead and tell the whole story of when I was depressed. Like, just everything that happened at the time, for a few reasons. Mostly because I haven't told the story extensively before, and I'm always one to tell stories. It's just that this one is maybe somewhat uncomfortable, you know, if not for me, then for the audience. And also because, but I mean, that's all the more reason to do it. And on like the last, it must have been the last Decompression podcast, or maybe some other video before it, I was like talking about like part of my experience of being depressed, and Devu said, like, when I was talking about it there, it sounded much scarier than it had ever sounded before. Like, he'd heard me talk about having been depressed, but never really, like, in depth or anything. And I was like, huh, that's interesting that's, you know, because he's listened to everything I've done, so if he hasn't really heard how scary it could be, then it means I haven't talked about it enough. And I'm 25 years old now, and, you know, every year that goes on, these stories of my teenage years become harder and harder to tell. And it's funny because for me, I regard all of this as like really uninteresting. Even though if someone else was telling the same story, I'd find it interesting. But for me, there's like this weird disconnect where like I think of myself as the guy who's been making videos for the last 3 years, you know? And like anything before that feels like a different person to me. But that's not at all the case. Like, so much of how I act now, and so much of all of this was informed by, you know, how I was in my teenage years. And so I feel like that this story has to be told before it's too late, you know, before I can't remember it in enough detail. And maybe the fact that I have forgotten details will help to streamline this story to be consumable in podcast form. I thought about making this its own podcast on After Dark, but like, because I don't want to do this in video form. It would be too weird. I have an easier time talking about things I'm less comfortable with if there's no video, because I don't want to have to see myself saying it, or like, you know, worry about where I'm going to cut audio and stuff like that. Not as in cut for content, but like just edit out silences, because I have to think about what I'm gonna say so I can like remember everything. And I don't really have anything else to talk about this week. I've been playing Pokemon nonstop for 2 days. I will probably continue to play Pokemon nonstop for more days until the end of the period where this podcast would be slated to come out. So anyways, this is just going to be a depression story. And if that sounds like it'll make you sad, then don't listen to it. Like, for me personally, when other people talk about depressing shit, it usually, like, doesn't, like, I guess back when I was a teenager, I did find that kind of stuff comforting. Like, I did enjoy listening to other people talk about, like, their problems and their depression, because it made me feel like, you know, like I could relate to it. Nowadays, I just get sad because I'm not sad normally. But anyways, yeah. So we'll start from when I was a little kid. And I think as a kid, I don't think I could have been like what you would consider, because to me depression is like a long-term feeling of unease and displeasure with your life. It's where like for a huge amount of time you feel like things aren't going your way and you just want to fucking die. That's how I think of depression. And some people have like in and out of they'll be like, you know, oh, I felt really depressed for like a week and then I was back to normal. and I guess I still have times like that where I can get depressed for like a day or two, and I guess you'd still call that being depressed in a more general sense. But I'm talking about depression more in like a clinical sense, like 7 straight years of feeling like dog shit and wanting to die. You know, like that's my experience with depression. And so as a kid, like it's hard to think of it as depression because when you're a kid, you kind of just flip emotions constantly. Like, you know, it's just however you feel in that moment is how you feel. There's less of this like broader personal context, I feel like. Like when I think back to me being a little kid, there would be days where I felt absolutely terrible, but then I'd wake up the next day and I wouldn't even remember the fact that I felt bad the day before. You know, I just wake up the next day and whatever happens, happens. There was no sense of continuity between emotions. So there was a lot of stuff that would make me upset as a kid because growing up, my family moved constantly and I looked weird. You know, I had big old glasses and I looked like a girl. I had long hair and I was extremely effeminate. Anybody who's seen that video on After Dark where I said proof that I was a lolly shota, yeah, I look like a fucking girl. Like there's no two ways about it. I didn't understand that at the time. Like I was just mad that other people thought that. But I didn't like actually think of myself as looking like a girl until like later. So, you know, when I was young, I never made any friends. Like, it wasn't so much that I got picked on until, like, a bit later. Like, when I was, like, a little kid, it's just nobody would talk to me, and I didn't understand how to talk to people because I never talked to anybody. We'd moved fucking constantly. I never made any friends, you know, like, I remember, I'm sure I went to more than one kindergarten. I'm sure I went to more than one first grade, I did stay in the same second grade the whole year I was there. The first time my parents ever like settled down for more than a year in a place was in this cul-de-sac that we moved into when I was in the first grade. And me and my friends were sort of the outcasts among the cul-de-sac. You know Ed, Ed, and Eddie? We were Ed, Ed, and Eddie. And everyone else fit the archetypes the same way that the characters in that show do. Like, that show was like the story of my life when I was a kid. It was super relatable to me. With the only exception being that in Ed, Ed, and Eddie, a lot, like, particularly for Eddie, you feel like he kind of deserves what's coming to him, and like the other two wouldn't really be as hated if not for the fact that they hang out with Eddie. I kind of saw us as just victims, you know, when I was a kid. Like, I just didn't understand why anybody, why it was so hard to communicate with people, you know? And I mean, we knew all the kids in the cul-de-sac. We hung out with them, you know, I hung out with all these people, but I never felt like they liked me or understood me, or like wanted to be friends with me, with a couple of exceptions, with like just a couple of kids who were my friends. And so I made a couple of close friends in second grade. But then the what really started me like feeling depression and like understanding it to some extent was when I was in third grade, because I got put into this advanced placement school. It's like it's called School for Gifted Children, ODU, no, that's the university, ODC, and it was just like a separate school for smarter kids, but it was this huge long bus ride away. So at this point, even though, you know, my family up to this point is, we move all the time, and I lose contact with everybody I ever knew every time we moved. This time, I just changed schools, but that still means I'm not seeing any of my friends. Like, the friends who live around me, who I went to school with, are suddenly not around me, you know? And so yeah, I went to this gifted school, and first of all, I shouldn't have, because even though I was, like, really excelling, like in the second grade I was making like straight A's, you know, so they all thought, well, this kid's like a genius, you know. But then at this other school, it was like constant pressure to do like mountains of work, you know. It's not that you necessarily have to be smarter to do the work, it's that they give you more work, and I was not up for more work, and so my grades started falling a little bit. And this is the kind of school where, like, if you're making C's or below, you're going back to normal school. You know, like, it's not about just passing. It's like you have to be excelling, because that's the point of this school. And I was not excelling. And, you know, my mom was pretty harsh about grades. Like, she was always, like, guilt-tripping me and stuff about the fact that I wasn't, you know, making good enough grades. And sometimes she'd be like, you know, sit in the kitchen and don't leave until you do your homework. And I just would, like, sit there and just, like, stare at it and not do it. I'd just sit there for, like, hours and just stare at my homework. And, yeah, so I felt bad about the fact that I wasn't doing great in school. And then I was also getting more picked on, because this was at a time when Pokemon had come and gone as a big fad. It's like 98 or so. No, 90... If I'm in 3rd grade, then it's either 99 or 2000. Pokemon has kind of waned as a fad. And I'm still wearing Pokemon shirts and stuff to school because I care about it. You know, I've always been someone who cares very deeply about whatever I'm into. And people would make fun of me for wearing Pokemon shirts. They'd make fun of me for having long hair. They'd make fun of me for wearing glasses. You know, it never, like, escalated into full-on bullying. Like, the worst that would ever happen to me is that, like, someone might take my jacket and, like, pass it back and forth amongst a couple of kids, you know, and I'd be, like, trying to get it back. And that only happened once or twice. So, like, there wasn't a lot of physical bullying. It was mostly just people making fun of me, mostly for looking like a girl and liking Pokemon and, you know, all that good stuff. And I didn't know any of these kids. I didn't know how to talk to them. I didn't know how to clear up the issue. So I didn't make a lot of friends. And I remember that there was one day, I probably had gotten, like, a report card with the C on it or something. Or it was either that or I'd been made fun of that day in class, but I was just so fed up. And I went up, and this story is hilarious and depressing at the same time. If you listen to a lot of my stuff, you've heard me tell it before. That I went up to my brother Shade's room, and there was this line, like, basically a string of clothespins that went all the way up the wall that was, like, had Beanie Babies. Like, it's like a type of clothespin that's, like, made to hold Beanie Babies. And there was, like, this huge display of Beanie Babies my mom had set up in my brother Shade's room. Shade was, like, probably 2 or 3 at the time. So I go into Shade's room and I'm, like, crying. Then I sit down and I'm like, I'm gonna kill myself. So I take a clothespin and I put one clothespin over my nose and one clothespin over my lips with the hope that I can suffocate myself. This obviously will not work. Not even so much because I started gasping for air, but because the clothespins hurt to have on my face. And I've never been able to tolerate pain. Which is good, because that's what's kept me from self-harm over all these years, is my incredibly low threshold for pain. Someone there? Thought I heard somebody. So, but, you know, even if that was a hilariously unsuccessful attempt, I would still catalog that as a suicide attempt. Because people who have a history of attempting to commit suicide are far more likely to commit suicide. Like, if you've thought about it, if you've tried to do it, there's a chance that you're gonna keep trying to do it or keep thinking about it, you know? And so that was kind of, and I mean, I didn't know that at the time, but that's always been kind of a specter hanging over me when I've been suicidal, is like, you know, I kind of fit the profile of someone who would do it. But again, I can't really think of that as depression, because I'm sure the next day after that, I woke up and went about my day, and it was probably not that bad, you know? Like, I think me being upset and sad back then was more reactive. It's like I had a bad day, and therefore I felt depressed. There was less of that hanging gloom. And then when I started 4th grade at that school, that was just utterly miserable, because our teacher was like a way overblown hard ass. From what I understand, she was fired shortly after the year, because I left. Like, halfway through 4th grade, I left that gifted school because I just couldn't keep up. It was too much. And I was like the third person in the class to leave, and there were like 3 more people who left after me, and then that teacher, I heard she got canned, just from like sheer amount of complaints she was getting about what she does. Don't know how that works. I don't know why she didn't have tenure or something, but I don't know. So I go back to normal school, and now again, you know, I'm in 4th grade, but I don't know anybody. Like, I'm back to the school I was at before, but I don't know anybody. Everything's progressed past me. I don't know all these people and what they're up to. You know, I'm still getting made fun of because now there's like the skater culture thing, like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Bam Margera era starting to come in, and like there's all these skater kids who are like the cool kids, and I'm still sitting here with fucking Pokemon, you know, and everyone's like, what the fuck is, like, what's up with you? Because I never understood trends. I never understood, like, I never observe people. Like, I'm not someone who understands what other people are thinking easily, or like tries to look out for what everyone else is doing. I was always just doing what I wanted to do, and I didn't understand why that was a bad thing. You know, I never understood what I was supposed to be doing. And then finally, so, you know, 5th grade rolls around. I was in a class with some of my friends again. Eventually, we finally move. We moved to Florida. That fucking blew ass. But I don't think I was depressed. And that's where I started doing creative things more. Moved a few more times, you know, I went through middle school. But it wasn't really until I was 14, and it was sort of in between middle school and high school, that the depression, like, really began. And it was because, like, not only, you know, at school did I not really have any friends, and I wasn't really, you know, doing anything, but I was starting to become a teenager, so I was starting to become more hormonal, and starting to, like, understand the world around me a little bit more in a bad way. Like suddenly it's come into full focus that I'm the weirdo. Like, I think growing up until that point, I had always thought, like, everyone else is weird for thinking that I look like a girl or that I act this or that way. Then suddenly I realized, no, I'm the weirdo. I'm the one nobody understands. I'm the one who's the freak here, you know? That suddenly became very apparent to me in, like, the 8th grade. It was like, oh, I'm the odd man out. I'm the one who doesn't know what's going on. And that, you know, kind of hit me hard, and I just, like, I never made, like, real friends. Like, I would just kind of hang out with kids who I could joke around with, and, like, at the lunch table, but none of them really liked me. You know, there was a couple kids I would hang out with at my house, but, like, even then, I never felt like we were close. It's just, like, someone to do things with. You know, that's kind of what friends were to me, is, like, someone who had enough of the same interests that you could sit in the same place and do the same thing together, but then you don't really care about them outside of that, you know? The only person I ever had who was, like, a real close friend was my cousin Boyd, who's 4 years older than me, and me and him got into anime together, and we, like, really hung out all the time when I was in, like, the 6th and 7th grade, but then he moved away to Pennsylvania, and I didn't see him for, like, a few years, so during the period where I then got depressed. So, like, yeah, I didn't have any real good connections, and my parents started fighting, and there was a not so much, like, violent fighting as just, there was, like, a lot of, it looked like they were gonna split up. Like, it looked like my parents were going to divorce. You know, things were getting, like, heck. There was a point where, like, a brief period where my dad just, like, stayed in a hotel for a few days, you know, like, to not be in the same house kind of thing. So that was, like, really traumatic, because me and my brothers all thought, like, this is it. They're gonna fucking split up, you know? I mean, my parents, up through this point, you know, they used to, my parents don't fight anymore. Like, these days, they're just like a fucking docile old couple, essentially. They used to fight, and we'd always be like, this is it. It's finally happening, you know? So, yeah, I was 14. I was the weird kid in school. My parents seemed like they were gonna split up, and this is really where this is where I would begin, like, chapter depression, you know? And I was really into online communities at the time, and I spent a lot of time on these message boards, and I know there was some poster who, we'll say it was female for the sake of the story. I have no idea for real, but I was like in love with this person. So I was always on these message boards and like, you know, trying to seek out relationships online. Like I was starting to become aware of the idea of relationships online and friendships online. But even online, I was a fucking weirdo. Like no one understood me, and I had a very crass sense of humor, a very confrontational attitude. I cared way too much about the things that I like and was like ready to fucking fight tooth and nail about anything I liked. You know, you're wrong for disagreeing with me kind of attitude. I mean, if you think I come off that way in my videos now, you have no fucking idea how toned down it is. Like I was a fucking brat in my teens online. And you know, most of the people on internet message boards are older. They're in their later teens or their early 20s. That's like the main age range of people on message boards. And those people were not having it, you know, because I was a fucking bratty kid, and I don't blame anyone for that. But you know, that's why I was, even online, I felt like an outcast and I was depressed. So where it all really spiraled down was my dad, who had been working in the car business for a long time, and my dad's an amazingly hard worker. My parents both came from really like pretty much nothing. You know, my dad in high school had to like steal to eat and stuff, like, and he was deathly skinny. He joined the Navy when he was 18, dropped out of high school, joined the Navy, and like just so he could eat. Essentially, he said, like, you know, they would give me free food if I joined, so that's why I joined. And my mom had run away from home at like 16, so they're both from, you know, like really low class sort of environment. And they had worked just normal kind of jobs, but they're both really hard workers, and they both would always, you know, get to management positions quick and stuff like that. And my dad joined the car business and was immediately the best salesman. Like every month, he would always win salesman of the month. You know, he'd always move up the ranks through the car industry. So he had been fairly successful at that. So we'd been living, you know, the middle class suburban life for a long time. Well, my dad was going through all this like spiritual shit. He was becoming like a Christian and constantly reading spiritual texts and stuff, and just generally felt that the car business was not in line with his like current, you know, state of mind and lifestyle. And my parents were trying to make up after all this fighting they've been doing, and we were like, let's move again. And we moved into downtown Richmond, and we moved into this old ass house. It was like a house built in like the early the early 1900s or something like that. And it was huge, and it was really cool, but it was like kind of, you know, falling apart. But because it was so old and so falling apart, it was really dirt cheap. So we got to get a huge house for dirt cheap, and my dad became an apprentice electrician. So his wage, you know, plummeted from what it used to be. And we lived in this house from like September through February, I want to say. 2004 to 2005. 2005 to 2006. From September to February. Something like that. It was 6 months that we lived there. And those 6 months were grueling. That was by far the worst period of my life. And I've often said of that period that I think I might have legitimately gone insane. Like, I was losing my fucking mind. Because we moved into this big old house, and we were in the middle of, like the ghetto. We were in the ghetto in, like, downtown Richmond. Me, Victor, and Shade, we all, I was in high school, Victor was in middle school, Shade was in elementary school. We went to, like, all black schools. Like, there was no white kids there at all. Like, maybe, I would see, like, 5 or 6 white kids in the whole school. Mostly black and Latino and stuff. And it was really hard to make any friends that way, because, I mean, I've been an outsider among white people. You know, the school I was going to before that was all white people, and I still felt like an outsider. Now, I'm the only fucking white kid And I'm a fucking weird white kid, you know. So I was not able to make any friends at this school. No one would talk to me. No one wanted anything to do with me. I totally just looked like an outsider to their culture and everything. It was like, this kid knows nothing about what's going on here, you know. So I felt totally alone at this school. And I had, you know, at this point I had super long hair, and I was growing in like this shitty ragged facial hair. Kids would always call me Joe Dirt, and I started wearing sweatpants all the time. No fashion sense. I looked like total shit, you know, and nobody wanted to talk to me. This is at the period where I'm starting to, like, you know, really like want a girlfriend and stuff like that. That's not happening, obviously. And at home, I just felt like I couldn't talk to anybody. Like, no one else understood what I was going through, you know. My parents have always been hard to talk to about anything emotional because they just don't seem to get it, or they don't get where you're coming from. Like, their mindset is kind of like, how could you possibly not be happy when you've got so much, you know? Not that would have been the case at this time, but, like, I didn't see a lot. Jesus Christ, the fucking wind is, like, rattling my house. I didn't see my family as much as I had before, you know, and Victor just kind of holed up in his room and played a lot of GameCube, and part of it was that, like, in the previous house, I'd been really into video games. Like, I'd gotten huge into gaming, and like, particularly RPGs, and I'd buy tons and tons of RPGs with all the allowance money I could get. So, like, probably $20 to $25 a week I'd get, and I'd go out and buy all these used games at GameStop. So I had a decently sizable collection of PS2 RPGs that I had recently accrued. Then my PS2 broke, like, right when we moved. So, gaming, out the window. Because all the new games I had or was excited about were all PS2 games. Now I don't have a PS2 and we can't afford to buy a new one. You know, the GameCube was still there, which we'd had all these games from, like, 2001 till then. You know, but Victor had that, and so I just wasn't playing a lot of games, and I didn't have any money to buy anything. You know, there was no passion which I could support here. Now, I remember that it took a month for the internet to get hooked up in this house. Like, we moved in, and it was a whole month without internet, so I couldn't go onto these message boards where I'd been, like living, you know. I couldn't do anything, really. I had my own computer, but it didn't have internet access, so all I used it for was, like, writing poems and listening to whatever music I had on there. And that month just kind of broke me. It's like I had no one to talk to. No one online, no one at school. Like, if I hadn't had Victor and Shade around, I probably would have just utterly lost it. Like, if there had been literally no one to ever talk to, I think I would have fucking gone completely insane. But I would just, like, lay around and cry, essentially. Like, I would just lay on my bed, despondent, for days, you know. This is where I started keeping a knife under my mattress, you know, just in case the day finally came that I could kill myself. I'd be ready, you know. And I was super guarded about all of it. I wouldn't talk to anybody about the idea that I was feeling bad. Anyone I was in front of, they didn't get to know about this, you know. The internet finally did get hooked up in this house. So I was on the message boards again, but the internet was, like, the most painfully slow. Like, you click on something and it takes, like, up to 5 minutes to load a page. So I'm on message boards, like, you know, refreshing the page and then, like, waiting 5 minutes for it to refresh and then refreshing again until someone says something, and then I immediately reply, you know, and then wait all day to see if the response will come. That was my life. Sitting on a message board, waiting for people to say something so that I can respond, and then waiting more, and then loading the page and loading the page. And if I remember correctly, like, I guess I had taken the speakers from my mom's computer because she wasn't really using them, and I had those in my room because my computer had a bunch of music on it. Obviously music streaming was not a thing yet, but I had a bunch of, you know, music downloaded to my computer from my cousin having put it there, or ripped CDs I'd put on there. So the only computer that had internet was in my mom's office, and so I would sit in her office in silence all day, reloading this fucking page, waiting for anything. I started questioning my sexuality a lot. I definitely thought I was bisexual for a while. For a little while, I thought I might be gay. I had like a very brief internet relationship with a guy, which turned out super weird, and I bailed on. And anytime, I was always trying to seek out, internet relationships. Basically, anyone who would pay enough attention to me, to talk to me, I would try to, establish a relationship with. And there was a couple people who did, who, in retrospect, I realized were like utterly broken people. Like people with way, way, way worse, stuff going on, than I have. So, I guess I was pretty broken at the time too. So like it was me like trying to enter like little relationships with other horribly broken people, and then it would always get weird for me at some point. Like when it started to feel real, that's when it would feel weird to me, and I would break it off in the most like asshole way possible. Like I'd always say something like, I was just using you for my own fucking gain or something, and like, I actually don't care about you or anyone, and I hate the world. Like that's the kind of, I would just totally break off communication with people and do it in the most dickhole way that I could think of. So, lived in that house for 6 months. I think everybody was pretty fucking depressed and upset. I don't think anybody liked being there. My dad finally took back up, he got back into the car business, because, this had been the second time that he had left the car business only for everything to go to shit, because when we moved to Florida a few years prior, that was the same story. He'd left the car business, we went to live with my aunt for like 3 months, then like, it was such a nightmare that they like, fully paid our trip back home to rehire my dad at a higher position, because they wanted him so badly. And it just was like utter misery. But again, I wasn't really depressed yet at the time. This is more like outright depression. So finally, we moved back to Virginia Beach, which is the city I live in now. I've lived here a lot. Like a lot of those houses were in Virginia Beach. So we moved to Virginia Beach in like a little house. I started going to this high school in the 9th grade, where I ended up going for the rest of high school. But at this point, again, like, I'm a new kid again, still not making any friends, still kind of like just a weird guy. Now I'm depressed. Now I don't know what the fuck to do with myself. So, I started collecting music, but no one understood. I had no one to talk to about it. No one understood my fucking taste in music. No one understood what I was going through, and it just fucking sucked, and I was miserable all the time, and I hated living. The end. And like, for years, eventually, as high school went on, I started making friends. Like, slowly but surely, I started accruing a little stable of friends who would come over all the time and hang out, and that made things a little better. And then really, like, for a little while, what had like kind of saved me was getting back into anime. Because, I'd been really into anime in 2003, and then I kind of, got into other stuff, video games and music, and then in 2007, at like the very beginning of the year, I got into anime in a much bigger way, thanks to the Mega Tokyo forums. And that's when I started my blog, and like watching anime and blogging made me really happy. Like that was the one thing I had going on that made me super duper happy, and made it like way easier to deal with life. But I was still constantly bouncing between like utter terror, especially because this was now at the time where, I'm in high school and everyone's talking about what are you going to do in your future. And like, for me, it was always the debate of, am I going to take school seriously and go all out, or am I going to leave? Because I sort of looked at it as an all or nothing. It's like, either you're going to stick around in school and really excel and make great grades and, and go to a good college, or, because if you don't go to a good college, there's no point. So you might as well just drop out and go do whatever the fuck you want. And this was like, I was finishing up 10th grade, and I was about to go into 11th when all this is happening, when I'm getting into anime and all that, again, still kind of depressed, and then like I was just like constantly bouncing between like being paranoid or just stressed out or not wanting to talk to people or just not feeling comfortable in my own body, you know. I got really interested in like all kinds of like LGBTQ stuff. Like I was super obsessed with that in my late teens. Like just I guess I identified with that sense of like not being sure if you are who you're supposed to be, you know, like for a while I thought that like maybe I'm supposed to be a woman, you know, but I never like took it very far in the way that people do now. I think because the culture embraces it so much more, that there's places like Tumblr where people are like, you know, you can easily meet people who are doing stuff like that, that it's so much more of like a thing people like jump headlong into in their teens. Whereas for me, it was just kind of like an interesting question that like every once in a blue moon, I'd hear something about you know, about like gender fluidity or something like that, and well, I guess that term probably didn't even exist yet. Just people changing genders and stuff, and I was like, whoa, and I'd be like super fascinated with it. Became super obsessed with Yuri and lesbians, and like that was all I cared about for a long time was Yuri. And then like, so I remember over that summer, I watched Manabi Straight and utterly broke down, because at the end of that show, it's about, like, the main characters graduate high school, and they all sort of go their separate ways, and you see them all, like, one girl goes to America to continue her studies, one, like, goes into sports, they go into all this different stuff, and Manabi herself, she just becomes a freeder, as they call it, where she just goes between different part-time jobs and like doesn't stay to one place. And everyone was kind of like shocked by it, but she was like, yeah, you know, like she's free-spirited, she'll be happy wherever she goes. And that just like totally broke me, because I was like, fuck, you know. And I was trying to like do the academic route. Like I was setting myself up that I was going to do like advanced placement English, and I was going to go to like, our school had this program called ATC where you go to like a technical school and like they bus you back and forth to learn more technical stuff, and I was going to try to do that. You know, I was like ready to try to do this fast track thing, and then I watch Manabi and I see her like, yeah, you know, I can be happy wherever I go. And I was just like utterly mind broken, like trying to decide, you know, am I going to become a school guy, or am I gonna like look at Manabi, she could have fucking done anything and been happy about it. Why can't I just go do anything, you know? I became really obsessed with the idea of becoming a film director. And so 11th grade started, and I sort of got fucked in regard, because basically there was a miscommunication between me and my guidance counselor, and I ended up not being able to go to ATC. I did get the advanced placement English class, but that's the only advanced thing I had. So I was no longer on this like, you know, like excellent track to success. And the technical courses that would have given me the kind of knowledge that would have like allowed me to fucking do things, you know, totally out the window. Advanced placement English fucking sucked. I hated my teacher. I hated the whole style of the class. You know, I love literary analysis. Obviously, it's what I do. You know, and at the time, I was always happy to write analytically. It's that the teacher wanted you to read everything a certain way. You know, she had her idea of what the story means, and you had to kind of bring that out. It was fucking horrible. I hated it, and it was way too much work. And so I became the most depressed ever. And, you know, I'd met my friend Don-san, and, like, we'd bonded over mutual love of Welcome to the NHK, because that for me was the most relatable thing in the world. And I remember I would just sit in my room, like, paranoid, and not leave, and I'd just talk to him about how paranoid I was, you know. And he was a hikikomori, like a full-blown one, like not even leaving his room for like years, because he had a condition that kept him out of school, so he would just like be in his room all day every day and not leave. And we kind of bonded over that. But you know, that's where I was going, and there was times where I would get so paranoid about my grades, because my grades were slipping and I didn't want my parents to know. So like I'd get like a report card or a progress report, and I'd just like lock myself in my room all day, and like I never actually did reach this point because I'm squeamish about doing so. But like I would take bottles and be like, I'm gonna piss in this bottle instead of going downstairs to use the bathroom because I don't want my parents to see me. You know, never ended up doing that. I'd just hold it all day. I would hold in peeing for hours, like waiting till I thought everyone might be asleep or that no one would hear me come down the stairs and ask about my progress report. You know, like I was so fucking paranoid. And just, yeah, I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to hole up in my room and watch anime and write my blog and post about shit, you know. And I mean, you can read a lot of my writing from this era is on my blog, and a lot of it's just like, well, there's a lot of posts I set to private because they were just like nonsense, had nothing to do with the blog, but like a lot of it would just be me telling stories about how fucking sad I am. You know, I wrote about Manabi Strait in my reaction to it years back, and I wrote about Evangelion and how that was like a huge connector for me when I was 14, when I first got depressed. Like someone had loaned me the show and I watched all of it like just before my 15th birthday. That blew my fucking mind because I related to Shinji so perfectly. Everything about him was exactly how I felt. But so yeah, you know, I'm just wandering through this life of being depressed and fucking, like, it was never worse than 11th grade. Like, that early part of 11th grade when I was in advanced English and stuff, and, like, just being overwhelmed by work and stress, I wanted to kill myself badly. And, like, I would have these nights where I'd just lay in bed thinking about, like, how I'm either going to run away the next day. Like, I'd extensively plan out, how am I going to run away? Where am I going to go? How am I going to live off the land? You know, and just, like, escape from life. Or, how am I going to kill myself? How can I do it where it won't hurt? Or where, like, how can I get the materials? How can I, you know, but then I worry about, like, what are my parents, you know, how's it going to affect them? Like, I don't want to devastate my mom, you know, like, my mom would fucking not be able to handle one of her kids killing themselves. She would have fucking completely broke. Like, she would have lost her mind if one of us killed ourselves, because she cares way too much about us, you know? So yeah, like, that was a huge, like, factor preventing me. But then I would just think, well, what if I just hurt myself? Like, if I hurt myself badly enough, people have to notice. Because that's the thing. I wanted someone to notice. I wanted someone to notice that I was freaking out, that I was depressed and stressed out. But I wouldn't tell anybody. You know, I didn't have the courage to talk about it, but I just wanted someone to figure it out. And, like, in my mind, I thought, don't I look horrible? Don't I look depressed? Like, I'm scowling all the time, aren't I? Don't I look sad? But then anytime I'd look at myself in the mirror, I'd realize I didn't look that way. I just look normal. Like, I don't have an emotive face. I don't really show what I'm thinking. I have an amazing poker face, if you will. You know, I would literally think that I looked depressed and then see myself in the mirror and realize I looked normal. And I'm like, this is why nobody's noticing. This is why nobody's noticing the cry for help that's only on the inside, you know? The few times I had to deal with anything with my parents, I would write them notes. Because I was confident in my writing. So I would just, like, write out these, like, multi-page notes and leave them on the table before school, like, where I was, like, way more honest about what I was thinking or what I was trying to do. There was one where I was like, I want to drop out of school. Here's my plan. You know, I wrote out this whole thing, and my parents were just like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, no. So, you know, throughout 11th grade, I was determined I was going to drop out. I was going to drop out and become a film director. I was just going to start making movies. Yeah, that was like where my head was at. And at this time, I reconnected with my cousin Boyd, and eventually, like, around the time I was finishing up 11th grade and going into 12th, he moved in with me, like, into my room. So I would say that gave me less, like, I had less ability to just sit around and be paranoid and, like, fucking, you know, losing my mind and going crazy. So I guess that helped, though I still was, largely depressed, and we never got anything off the ground with regards to film. I was trying to make movies that never worked. I tried to write stories. I have, like, just the other day I was going through all my notebooks of all the story concepts I had. There's fucking, like, dozens and dozens of them. There's so many story ideas I tried to get off the ground that never amounted to anything, Because for 10 years I thought I was going to be writing fiction or producing some kind of fictional stories. So I have tons and tons of stories that just never came to be anything. I was working on the blog all along just because it made me happy. I never thought there'd be a future in it. I never thought that was something that would take off. And, like, there was a period where I thought, well, maybe I can do this professionally by writing for a website. There was one time I submitted a review to Anime News Network, and they tore me to shreds because of the fact that I spoke in first person, and that it was more personal than objective, which I guess they try to go for so-called objective reviews. So I got rejected hard. Not that I think that review was actually good, but so for a long time I was kind of under the impression I'll never be able to get work for a website because the way I write is too out there. I write about myself. I write Gonzo style posts, and that's I don't want to change that. It wouldn't be fun anymore if I just wrote articles, that's not my style. Then it would just be a job. There was a moment when I was 16 where I had this sort of phrase I came up with. Because I've never believed in any kind of higher power. I've never believed that there's really meaning to human life in the universe. I've always had that sort of nihilistic outlook. I've never believed that there's anything more to life than personal happiness. Making your own life good. You can make the world good, but it's always going to be in small parts. And really part of making the world good is making your own life good. Global happiness comes when everybody's happy, and if you're not happy, then you're dragging down the global happiness, So, to me, making myself happy was the most important thing, and I had determined when I was 16 that, if I'm not happy, there's no reason to be alive. What could possibly make it worth it? If there's no greater cosmic purpose to my existence, then why even be alive if I'm not happy? That was the great question at the heart of it. And so to me, every second that I wasn't happy with my life was just a countdown to suicide. But the thing that kept me going is that I've always been very optimistic and very, in spite of all the depression and cynicism, I've always been a hardcore optimist. I always think things are gonna go okay, and so what kept me going is that I always believed that I was gonna get out of it. I always believed eventually this will all end and I'll become rich and famous, because that's always been my goal: be rich and famous, particularly rich. I want to have enough money that I can kind of do whatever I want with it, and I want to be doing what I love. I want to be rich and famous from doing what I love, and I always believed that was gonna happen. I always thought eventually I'm going to write the story that breaks, or I'm going to make a movie that breaks. Something's going to give. Something's going to happen, and I'm going to succeed. And I never stopped believing that, which is why I wouldn't kill myself. Even when I desperately wanted to, it was but if I do, then these ideas never come out. The success never comes if you give up. So just keep fucking bashing your head against the wall until it breaks. It's sort of always been my mentality, which is why shows like Gurren Lagann resonate with me so much. It's about overcoming what appears to be impossible, no matter how long it takes and how much effort. So that's sort of what kept me going. And but yeah, again, the cries for help, the worst one I remember, the scariest thing I did was that I wanted to somehow hurt or kill myself. And I just, again, I'm terrified of pain. And I just put my hand on my shoulder, grabbing the back of my shoulder. And I just started scratching like just up and down, scratching my back. And I probably had pretty long nails. And I just kept doing it for like 25 minutes. Like just like thinking about how badly I hoped that eventually I'd, you know, either bleed or something, or like it would cause just anything that would make this noticeable, you know. And I'm just scratching this back part of my shoulder for like 20 minutes. And then finally I look at my fingers and I see that there's all this blood caked in under my nails, and I freaked out. Because that's the thing. I want, like, even though one part of me wants there to be pain, the second I register that it's there, it's suddenly terrifying, you know? So I go running down to the bathroom, and I look, and I have all these fucking, you know, these 4 trails of blood from where I've just scratched fucking all the skin off my shoulder. And I just freaked out, and I didn't tell anybody. I covered it, you know, it was all within shirt range. None of it was something that would show on my body, so, you know, my shoulder hurt for a day or so, and then it was gone. But, like, it was fucking terrifying to think, like, to realize, like, I've actually done something to myself. I've actually hurt myself, you know? So, yeah. So that's kind of the general state of mind I was in. For most of high school, just sitting around in my room hoping to die, waiting for the day I get to die, you know, or that something succeeds, or that I break through. It had to be one or the other. It's an all or nothing scenario. Either I make something so good that the world loves me, or I fucking end it all in squalor. And the decisions I made from then on, from like high school onwards, were all about sort of prolonging the inevitable. Because I really thought that if I got a normal 9-to-5 job and eventually gave up on creativity, that's when I'd die. That's when it would finally kill me. Is, you know, if I was unable to live doing what made me happy, then that's what's finally going to do me in. So as high school was ending, my dad's like, you have to either get a job or go to college. Pick one. And I picked college, obviously. And this is when I moved, like, we moved into the house I live in now, right after I graduated high school. And I've lived here for 7 years. So, going on 8. It's a long time. This is the house I've lived in by far the longest. Finally stopped moving around. Like, when I was in high school, we moved once, but it was the same high school zone as was this house. But I was out of high school by then. So I start college. I start going to community college. And I was, for whatever reason, for years, I was terrified of driving. My mom wanted to start college too, so me and my mom went together. We both went to an art college, and, you know, she would drive me, and we would go out and, you know, spend most of the day there and come back. And so, yeah, I went to college with my mom, hilariously enough. And, you know, it didn't make it, nothing was any better there. Like, I felt more open. Like, okay, I like college way more than school. Like, high school fucking blows. High school is the worst experience of my life. College is fine. It's just like, I didn't want to do it. You know, that's the worst thing about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, I mean, there's a lot wrong with it as an institution in terms of the fact that it costs way too much fucking money. And it's way too inconsistent with how useful it actually is. You know, some professors are worthless. Some are okay. Some classes will teach you something, and some classes will teach you absolutely nothing. And there's no difference in how much those cost. You know, so, like, I don't advise college, but in terms of, like, a place to go and do a thing, it's not so bad. It's not like high school where it's just a miserable, draining fucking nightmare of an experience. It's fine. I just didn't care. I didn't want to do it, and I had middling grades in all my classes, and I wasn't doing all that well. Now, as it went on, like, we did one semester with me and my mom, and then my dad convinced me and my cousin Boyd, who was still living in my room, he convinced us, like, that we should try to start studying business. Because my dad's always kind of had this dream of opening a family business. But he only wanted to do it if we were all going to take it seriously, and he didn't think we would. He was like, you guys have not proven that you can actually work on anything. So he said, if you guys could study business and learn how to do it and like prove to me that you understand it, then we could open up a family business. And we were like, well, that sounds promising. Business classes, you can take all of them online. Don't ever do this. Never take all online classes unless you're really confident that you can do all the work. Because I signed up for like 3 or 4 business classes, all online. This is where everything broke down. This is where it finally broke me. Because I have a guilt complex about not doing well. Like, I want my parents to think that all the money they've poured into me and all the livelihood that I've stolen from them has not gone to waste. I want them to be proud of me and to think I'm doing well. But I didn't like school, and I was not going to do it, and most of my days would consist of me sitting around thinking about how badly I need to do this schoolwork. And I wouldn't do anything else because, if you do something else, then that's distracting you from the schoolwork. But I didn't want to do the schoolwork, so I would just sit around depressed and hate myself and hate my life and hate everything I'd gotten myself into. And there was a brief period where I tried to turn my business studying into anime blogging. If you go through my blog, you can find posts I wrote about both Gurren Lagann and Serial Experiments Lain, where I took chapters of the textbook and like applied them to anime in order to make it interesting for myself. Because I had realized while reading the textbook that anime blogging and textbooks were actually fairly similar. Like, you're basically just describing facts about a thing. So like, yeah, I tried to do that. Didn't keep it up for very long. I probably wrote like 2 posts. And then there's like a deadline for when you can cancel classes. And I knew well ahead of this deadline that I should cancel. But I was too afraid to admit it. I didn't want to admit to my parents that I was going to drop out, that I couldn't do it, that it was a waste of time. And my parents kept asking me, like, every day they'd ask, like, are you doing the work? Are you doing the online coursework? And I'd always go, yeah. Like, we'd be at dinner and I'd just be like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'd never look them in the eye and say it. I think they knew I was fucking lying, because why else would they ask all the time, I was just lying about it. And then the day fucking passed. Like, the time passed. And then I just felt even worse. Because it's like, well, now I've fucked them out of all the money. They could have got their money back before this date. And because I'm too much of a fucking coward to admit that I'm not doing the work, now all that money's gone. Probably over $1,000. It's community college. It's not like I'm wasting university dollars. But which would have been absolutely devastating. But yeah, I mean, it was a waste of a huge amount of money, and I just wasn't doing it, wasn't doing the work. And eventually, I mean, my mom, like, your grades in these classes are on this online thing called Blackboard. My mom has the password to my Blackboard. She can look at my grades anytime she wants, But I think my parents knew that I was failing, and they were trying to, like, get me to say it. So there's one day, my mom starts asking me about my grades. I'm, like, downstairs hanging out, and she starts asking. And I'm just, like, avoiding the question. She's like, I have your Blackboard password. And I just, like, retreated. I just, like, ran. I just ran up to my room. I closed the door. I had a fucking panic attack. Now, if you've never had a panic attack, it's basically where your heart starts racing. You start breathing heavily. You feel like you're, like, everything. There's, like, lots of adrenaline and feeling like you're going to pass out at the same time. It's just like your heart and body are out of rhythm with one another. I was just freaking the fuck out, and I'm just like, it's over. She knows. She's definitely seen my grades. I don't know what the fuck I'm thinking. I don't know what I'm trying to hide. This was when I was like, I need help, because, like, there's this line in Welcome to the NHK that resonates with me so strongly. It's in the anime when Sato. There's, like, this other guy who's a hikikomori who they meet later into the show. And the guy says at one point, like, all those shelves are lined. They're in his room. He's got all these bookshelves. He says, all those shelves are lined with self-help books. I've read them all. I could probably write one myself. and none of it's helped. And that was how I felt at the time. I'd read everything about how to get yourself out of depression, how to be a positive thinker, how to, you know, stop worrying and love the world kind of thing. Like, I'd read all this shit, and I too felt I could write one, you know? But it wasn't helping. None of it was helping. None of it was actually getting me out of this situation. None of my personal effort, none of the effort I'd put in over the last 6 years, because I'm 20 at this point, you know? 6 years, maybe I'm 19. I'm 19 at this point. So 5 years of trying to get out of it, and it just wasn't happening. Nothing was getting me out of it. Nothing was working. And I was like, this has got to be clinical. Like, there's just no way. There's no way I'm getting out of this. I've tried everything I could. I've looked up, you know, my dad has always had the kind of attitude that, like, you can just get through things. You know, that's why it was impossible for me to talk about this with my dad, because he saw it as a personal strike, you know, well, you just got to work hard and, you know, you just got to pick yourself up. And I'm like, yeah, I've tried that. You know, I can't work hard because I'm fucking depressed, because I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything, you know? I don't want to, there's no making myself want to do these things. I don't understand what you think I can do, but that's not a thing I can do. So that's when I was like, this must be fucking clinical. There's nothing I can do about this. I've tried all that I can, and none of it's worked. So let's seek help. So, you know, and I'm like, I've looked into a lot of this shit online. I mean, I've been researching suicide this whole time, and I'm constantly looking up stuff about suicide, stuff about depression. You know, I'm always trying to figure out what the fuck is the issue, or what I can do about it. So I found out that if you were to go to a hospital and tell them, I think I'm gonna kill myself, then they'll put you in like a room and fucking look at you or whatever. And hold on to you until someone shows up to fucking claim you or whatever. So I was like, alright, here's what I'm gonna do. And this is what I did. I wrote out a letter to my parents, because again, I can only really communicate through writing, at like 2 in the morning, because my dad wakes up at 4:30 a.m. 2 in the morning, I write this letter extensively explaining, like, I'm depressed. I've failed those classes. You're not getting that money back. You know, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing with my life. I'm never getting any better. I've tried everything. I know this stuff inside and out, and nothing's gonna happen unless I fucking get help. You know, I'm going to the hospital. I've ridden my bike to the hospital. You know, you can come find me. And so I got on my bike in the, like, frigid fucking February air. I was wearing a t-shirt, so I didn't think to grab a jacket, and then once I was out the door, I didn't want to go back inside. So I'm fucking freezing, riding my bike down the fucking, like you know, miles up the road to the hospital. And I show up, and I sit in the waiting room, and it just so happens that the way the waiting room is laid out, and because it was so late, no one could see me. No one ever noticed I was in the hospital. I sat in there for probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, with like CSI playing, and I was just holding. I didn't have my own cell phone, so I'd taken my mom's phone. Like, I'd written the letter, like, you know, if you need to call me, I have mom's phone. So I had my mom's phone on me, and I was just holding onto it, sitting in the lobby of this hospital for like hours. No one noticed I was there. Finally, I get a call from my dad, like, are you still at the hospital? I'm like, yeah, like, I'm, you know, shaky voice. I'm like, yeah. He's like, you know, have they seen you yet? I'm like, no. And he's like, just stay there. We're going to come get you. So they show up. Huge, teary-eyed, fucking dramatic spectacle. We go back home. They finally set me up with an appointment with a psychologist. Saw this psychologist for a while. Honestly, like, it's funny because for me, the value of a psychologist was simply that I could talk to someone who actually understood what the fuck I was talking about. Like, I don't think I learned anything from him. I don't think it was a process of, like, there was something I didn't know about myself that had to be unearthed. You know, there was none of that. And I also think he was, you know, he was milking me. This dude, everything about the place I was at was kind of shady. I think this dude kept me coming back for longer than necessary because it was paying him, you know. But like, just the fact that I could talk to somebody who actually knew where I was coming from, who understood what depression is, who understood these hangups I had, and where my anxiety was coming from and why I felt that way, that was enough to make it worth it to me. You know, that nobody else I could talk to would understand any of that shit. And so I saw him for a while, and then he got me to go to the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist prescribed me a medication called Wellbutrin. Now, I do not recommend this medicine to anybody, because even though it did work for me, lots of people who've taken it have had utterly devastating effects. My brother Victor, who turned out was also depressed, and he sort of came out about it around a year and a half later. He kind of went through the same thing. He was depressed for a super long time, decided there was nothing he could do about it, finally reached out for help, you know, partly inspired because I had done it. Starts taking medications. Victor went through like 4 medications, and every single one of them made him worse. And Wellbutrin was the one where he was the most suicidal he'd ever been, cried all day. He said like the most heavy moment of his life is like he was sitting there crying and listening to the song Sleep Forever by Portugal the Man and just thinking about suicide. And my dad came in and saw him crying and just came over and just like, you know, held him as he wept, and he was like, that was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. The worst I've ever felt in any case. And but for me, I got prescribed this medication by a guy who was like obviously just pushing it. Like, that dude, the guy who actually prescribed me, didn't know shit about me. Didn't know the first fucking thing about me. And every time I'd walk in, like, for another appointment, he would just write me up the fucking thing and send me on my way. You know, he'd, like, ask, how's it going? Like, how's the medication treating you? And I had a lot of concerns. Like, for instance, that it had this horrifying side effect that made me fucking blink constantly. You know, he'd just brush them off. He'd just be like, oh, well, you know, you'll get used to it. The stuff, you know, eventually it'll all start making sense. Like, that's the kind of attitude he had. So, yeah, I started taking this medication. And I went back to school. I did one English class, and then I did another semester of, like general studies and shit. And maybe another semester after that. But eventually, what happened was, like, at some point, I got a D in psychology, which I had thought of as a passing grade, but then I found out that a D is too low for it to be a transferable credit. And I actually liked the class. I liked psychology, and that's when I was like, I can't do college. There's no way I can do this. If I'm failing a class I like, then this is not for me, you know. But what the Wellbutrin did, to me, it was mostly an anxiety cure. Not so much that it cured depression, that it cured anxiety. Because my biggest problem really was anxiety, that I would get so hung up on, like, you know, not doing my homework, or that something bad was going to happen if I didn't do this, or that I wasn't getting my life together. Like, all those things made me anxious. What Wellbutrin allowed me was to stop giving a fuck. It was not that it made me work better. You know, it didn't make me actually do my schoolwork. It made me stop being anxious about the fact that I wasn't doing my schoolwork. So it didn't make me any more successful or better of a person. It just made me someone who wasn't fucking anxious all the time. You know, who, like, instead of going, oh my god, I'm not doing my homework, I can't watch anime, but I also don't want to do my homework, so I'm not going to do anything, I would just go watch anime instead of doing my homework. You know, that's what it offered me. So I dropped out of college, and then I spent like a straight year and a half doing nothing. You know, I got through the summer. That summer I went for a month to the Philippines, and to see my friend Ghost Lightning, anime blogger extraordinaire, and hung out with him for a month. And like, the hope was that was going to instill something in me, that I was going to become more worldly, you know. And I mean, I feel like I did, But the results were not what my dad was hoping for. You know, I did not come home and immediately get a job. I came home and immediately, interviewed for a job working for one of the dealerships that, for the BMW dealership that was under my dad's company, and they said they would hire me, and I never went back. I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to work. And I spent a straight, then my mom, that fall, my mom got cancer. And so I spent a lot of time, being the guy who would drive her to and from appointments, and I kind of made that my excuse for not working. And then time just kept going on, and I just kept not doing anything. You know, I mean, my parents were bugging me about it. They were stressed about it, but, you know, they had their own shit to worry about. I was just, not doing anything. Then finally, it was when I found out about Egoraptor and JonTron, and when Game Grumps started, and they talked about how it was actually their job to make YouTube videos, that, everything clicked, and I was like, I can do this. I can make YouTube videos. I have a clear, well-spoken voice. I understand, I write in this style already. I can make people care about this. And then I started the YouTube series Adventure Action RPG on Modal Soul Productions, which is video games analysis. That's what I thought I was going to be doing. But the audio was garbage, and so I thought, well, I need a microphone. So I went and got a normal job at Target, worked there for 4 months, bought a bunch of equipment, left the job, became a My Little Pony analyst, and achieved YouTube success. And I haven't really been depressed since then. I would say I stopped, again, the Wellbutrin really did cure my anxieties, which were the main source of my depression. And so even though I was still upset with myself for the fact that I wasn't really doing anything and I was just living stagnantly, I never became that level of anxious and paranoid again. And I eventually stopped taking the medication. I hated the side effects, and I felt well, I'm already I'm not depressed anymore, so fuck it. And I stopped taking them, and nothing, I did not regress. I just stayed the same forever. So I think whatever it was, I think there was just a point when I was 14, when my parents were gonna split up, and when we were moving into the ghetto, and I was going through hormonal changes. I think that I just I think at some point there became a deficit in the amount of whatever chemical keeps you happy. There was a deficit in that, and it never recovered. Let's say it's producing at a constant rate, and therefore, let's say it's 5, right? Let's say you always have 5 of this item in your head, and every day you expend one and a new one comes up, and then it feels like I expended 3 all at once, and so even though a new one kept coming up, it was never bringing me back up to 5. And when I took the Wellbutrin, it brought me back up to 5. And I've stayed that way. That's how it feels to me. It was just a sudden dip and then a sudden rise, and I've been fine since. Again, not that I was happy or anything. I just wasn't depressed. And then once I started my job and became successful on YouTube, now I've just been happy, And I do have times where I get depressed, but it's much more in that conventional, typical, everyman. Yeah, I felt depressed for a few days because I wasn't happy with how things were going, I haven't had a major, catastrophic, I want to fucking kill myself every day depression since then. Right now, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because all my fucking friends are depressed. Ben's depressed because, I don't know. I don't want to get into his personal stuff, but he's depressed right now. Hypocrite seems pretty depressed. Jesse's depressed because he's in heartache. Everyone I know is depressed, and it sucks because I hate when my friends are depressed because I want everyone to be happy, and there's nothing I can do to change that. There's nothing I can do to help them because they already know why they're depressed. And I can't make it not that way. And the things that make me happy don't make everybody else happy. Because for me, it's all about the feelings of security and doing what I want to do. Those are the two things that make me happy. Feeling secure and doing whatever I want. And both of those are facilitated by money. Like, those are both basically just straight up monetary things. So to me, making a lot of money is happiness. Like, they say money can't buy happiness. I fully disagree. To me, happiness has a concrete dollar value. It's, if I can make enough money by doing what I want to do, then I'm happy. And enough money, in my definition, is enough that I have savings that if anything goes wrong, I'll be ready. That I have money in savings so that if anything goes wrong, it won't bankrupt me. Having no debt, feeling like if I need to buy something, I can just buy it. Like, I wanted a $1,000 laptop. I bought one, because I wanted a laptop that wasn't gonna fucking fail on me like all my others did, and I bought that. And it wasn't a financially crippling thing to do so. It was just something I could go do. That to me is like the most valuable thing. More so than the laptop itself. The fact that I could buy it is the most valuable thing to me. That's the feeling of security and of being able to do what I want. And to be able to go out and eat every day and always eat stuff that I like, and to be able to just afford to have a decent lifestyle. Like, that's what happiness is for me. And I feel that, because all I really like to do is work and eat. As I've said on this podcast before, the only thing I really want to do is to work. I love making videos. I love doing shit. And the only time that I feel stressed about it is when I feel like I'm not getting out of the house enough. And it's easy to go out and just eat a few times a day. And there, I feel like I've gotten out of the house. And let's get back to work, I've put out... So far this month, as of this recording, I have put out 20 videos that I was in, according to my playlist. 20 videos have been released that I was a part of. That's not including at least 15 unreleased Let's Plays that I haven't edited yet. A commentary I filmed with Devu that I haven't edited yet. A podcast I recorded with Wave Motion Cannon, which... may or may not be out by the time of this recording. I don't know when it actually releases. I do lots of work. I'm always working. And on top of that, I've watched a few complete shows. I've played 24 hours of fucking Pokemon Sun. I've been working out every couple of days with Ben. I've been going out to eat all the time. I keep myself busy. And the only times I feel sad and upset with my life is when I'm not busy. When I don't have any ideas for work, or I'm not satisfied with any of my ideas, that's the worst time. When it's like, I don't actually want to do any of these ideas I have, and there's nothing else like right now, I actually probably would be in a little bit of a video creative rut, if not for the fact that I'm playing Pokemon. That's what's keeping me busy right now, is that Pokemon is here and I love it. And right before that, I was watching all those Chris Ott videos and getting into some of those ideas, and I'm always jumping from inspiration to inspiration so that I never get bored, because if I get bored I get sad, and I don't want to be sad. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm at now, and I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope it wasn't too depressing, or that it was interesting. I really don't know if it was interesting at all. To me, again, this stuff is almost about a different person, because that story ended in 2010. 2011. I was 20 years old, when I got the job at Target, and finally that was in late 2012, and that kind of put a stop to it all. I was depressed. I was a little depressed when I worked at Target because I had to work, but once I started the channel and everything kind of picked up from there, I've never had the worst it's ever been is when I broke up with my girlfriend, because it was my first big breakup, and we've been dating for 6 months, and it was a huge blow. But that's the worst I've felt since then. So yeah. Hopefully that's inspirational to some people if you're dealing with major depression, to find some way. And my brother Victor, who the medication didn't work for him, he just kind of accepted the idea that he'd be depressed forever. That was how he got out, or not how he got out of it, how he dealt with it was just to be this is who I am, just to self-identify as a depressed person and just live with it. But he's not depressed anymore because now he's in a really happy relationship, and that's like totally made him like a different guy. You know, he's like happy all the time now. It used to be he was always angry. Like every day that I talked to him, he was angry for no reason. And now he's usually happy for no reason. So he's totally about-faced just thanks to getting into a good relationship. So, you know, if you're depressed, seek to change something. And if you can't change anything by yourself, try to find somebody who can. And there's a lot of different ways to reach out. I did it through text usually, you know, writing a letter and just leaving it somewhere, because it's a lot easier than talking to someone. You know, if you can't walk up to your parents and talk to them, but you can at least write something on a piece of paper and just leave it where you know they'll see it, and then like, you know, and then you're at school, so you don't have to be there when they read it. That's another thing. I was never around when they were going to read this stuff. Then, you know, that's a great way to do it. So, yeah, enjoy your night or day. I'll talk to you next time.